技术简易英文 STE 这一块项目是很有兴趣的。那我的工作坊是这样子的，我会首先前面2分钟先讲几句话，然后我会把那个摄影头关掉，然后再放我的 PowerPoint。那前面的40分钟左右，我们会在先聊一些对于 STE 的一些基本的认识，还有它一些大致上大概怎么去使用它。然后过了10分钟的休息时间，我们就会进行那个比较有互动性的那个工作坊的一些就是看那个文件，就是做 analysis 好吗？那我现在就把那个 camera 关掉，然后把我的 PPT 放上去。OK， so 你们能看到吗？这个 PowerPoint
可以看到。
Okay, so let's start. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shumin, and I'm the principal STE trainer at True France Tech Docs in Singapore. So for today's session, I would like to share my experiences in the field of simplified technical English with you, especially seeing how this international standard helps to make the creation and management of global documentation a little bit less of a headache. I will therefore use several terms interchangeably that is actually a violation of the rules of simplified technical English, but I will apologize for this in advance. So simplified technical English used to be known as simplified English, and its official name is this wonderful acronym ASD-STE100, and all three to me mean the same, and we're talking about this standard based on practical experiences over the past 15 years in many different industries. So I believe most of us will recognize this kind of juggling. We have business requirements to take into account on top of our daily regular workload. Just getting the work done is not quite enough. There are different considerations like your time to market, or as the case may be, downtime. And of course, we are all forced to cut corners and save cost wherever possible. And at the same time, we want to be less dependent on a specific supplier. So this means a continuous juggling game where we are going to try and keep everything in balance to get our projects finalized on time, within budget, and with the right quality and without any further compromises. So we want to be able to do the work or get the work done our way. And of course, to engineers, it makes a lot of sense to use standards whenever possible in order to achieve similar results. However, surprisingly, in documentation, in the field of documentation, it still happens that standards are not highly regarded. And I'm not talking about technical writers or documentation managers. We all know about the importance of your documentation and the importance of standards to support your documentation. However, upper management and those people who basically sit on your budgets, who make the decisions for us, do not always have the same kind of regard for documentation that we know is very well deserved and very, very necessary. And actually, in this respect, the European Union specifically states in its regulations that documentation is an integral part of your product. So documentation is a very essential item, and it always comes at the last minute. Documentation always kicks in when the product is already late, when we already are over budget for the product lifecycle, yet we just need to cut corners, or we are expected to cut corners. However, we still want to stand behind what we do and make sure that as technical communicators, we provide a quality product. If you take a look at my slides, the calligraphy there stands for the Chinese word 改善, which is also what the Japanese would call Kaizen. The philosophy of Kaizen was first adopted by the Japanese car manufacturer Toyota, where they believe and firmly believe that continuous improvement of an entire value stream or an individual process to create more value with less waste should be the main pillar of their business operations. And I very much find that this is really what the ethos of STE is all about, where we continuously churn out technical content that are based on a few selected standard words from our vocabulary. In the process, create more value to our sentences with less waste, where in terms of translation costs, simplified English text becomes cheaper to translate. So how does simplified English potentially help us achieve this, and why, for starters, do we need simplified English? So as we probably all are aware, that there are in this world 3 times as many native speakers of Mandarin Chinese than there are native speakers of English. However, Chinese does not get us very far outside of East Asia, so English is a much better choice because it is actually the language that has the highest penetration into other continents. It is spoken on all continents, but the vast majority of people have English as a second rather than the first language. So English is a very global language. We can find English speakers in almost every country, but their understanding of English could be different from ours and may actually be limited. And English also happens to be a very rich language, meaning that, amongst other things, it has a huge vocabulary and it has about 3 times as many words as French or German. However, in French or German, you can say just the same things that you can say in English. You can express the same thoughts as accurately as in English. So this implies actually that English has redundant or ambiguous words. There are too many words with the same or very similar meanings. Also, grammar. English grammar is a problem even for most native speakers, so it can be highly confusing, especially to people with English as a second language. So we want to try and do away with this huge unnecessary part of the vocabulary, and we are attempting to simplify grammar to what is most essential to getting your message across. You are going to see in a few minutes some examples of simplified technical English writing versus standard type of writing. And after all, as technical communicators, we're not here to show off our literary skills. We're not writing poetry. We're not writing literature. It's not about Shakespeare or Li Bai. It's about informing your audience, the user, whether he is a consumer or an engineer, a maintenance technician or engineering staff. Okay, so in the hospital, it does not matter who you are talking to, but if you have a message for them, it should really go without saying that we want to be understood and language should never be an obstacle. Language is a means to communicate the information that we have to present to our user and to our audience. Okay. I believe I had a pretty long presentation title before, but that was only because the title of the specification is as such. And I wanted to take this opportunity to also hopefully address the differences between the different issues of simplified English, and also what we mean exactly by a controlled language. So perhaps I've already explained a little bit that here in Controlled English, we're trying to restrict the grammar and the vocabulary with the intention of improved readability for our human readers. So moving on to the next slide, if you can take a look at the photo here, this escalator is refusing to escalate, and this has been escalated to the engineer who is on his way up to check it out. So while it may sound like a nice pun or joke or something that has to do more with clever copywriting, when it comes to safety or usership, it's not exactly a very friendly piece of text to read in standard English. So we are seeing some of these common problems associated with the use of standard English or whatever people regard as proper language, even when writing documentation. We do find that many readers, many users of documentation get confused at times. As part of the confusion may arise that information is not being conveyed in a very clear, easy to understand way, and language can be exactly part of that. The use of confusing words, ambiguous words, different words for the same thing, or the same word for different parts of speech, the same word could be a noun, could be a verb, could be an adverb. All of these reasons contribute to confusing the reader, and therefore he or she is going to need more time to read and hopefully still understand what we are trying to tell them. Of course, it can easily prompt your customers to get to grow annoyed, frustrated, or even call the help desk. And sometimes it could be worse not to buy any products or subscribe to any or more of your services from the same company anymore. And yes, it can come even worse. He or she could be perhaps exposing themselves to safety risks. Now, a very important driver for the initiatives that have been around to simplify English, to try and do away with the complex aspects of standard language, has been translations. Because translation is a highly complicated process, and it's also a very important reason why we have to consider translations, because we need an ever-increasing number of translations. And translations as such are definitely very, very expensive to procure. And translation costs is a very important consideration or driver for attempts to standardize, simplify the English language as the source text for translations. And again, we'll see that in an example in a few minutes. Now, apart from costs, there's also a quality issue. Now, of course, there are bad translators, there are bad doctors, bad drivers, and yes, there are also bad translators. But the many bad translations that you come across do not necessarily arise from the fact that your translator or was a bad person or not suited for his or her job. You can have many perfectly valid English sentences that make a lot of sense, both from a technical and linguistic point of view, yet are impossible to translate into our languages without some genuine doubt. So a very simple example would be the English sentence to replace the gasket, especially when it's written. And if you don't hear the intonation, does it mean to replace the gasket? Does replace the gasket mean to replace it, as in take the old gasket and put it back into place? Or does it mean to discard the old gasket, take a new and identical item and fit it in part of the old part, in place of the old part? So even a very simple sentence like this is a potential issue for translated meanings. And in German or in French, you will have to make that distinction. Actually, your English readers, even when they are very, very fluent in English, may have a problem understanding you here, because this word replace in English, unfortunately, has two very distinct yet valid meanings. So translation quality definitely suffers when language is not standardized, whether it is ambiguity or the lack of consistency in our source text. Okay, so if we have problems creating, understanding, translating, publishing, delivering your documentation, your product information, it means that the time to market or the downtime, the time that the product is not going to perform the way that the user wants or needs it to perform, then that means we're losing a lot of money. Yes, simplified English, as we're going to see, it originates from the aircraft industry. and your average passenger aircraft will cost a few $100 million. Any hour that it sits on the tarmac rather than to be in the air where it was supposed to be actually means a lot of cost to the airline, and it is hardly any different with medical equipment, and we can draw parallels in just about any other industry. We just want to make sure that our product serves the purpose it's supposed to serve as efficiently as possible, and we don't want to waste any time, we don't want to waste any money. Also, many products require training for your engineers and service staff, even for users, operators, and of course, technical documentation normally forms the basis for training materials. Again, if the training materials or technical documentation have complex language, it is going to make it more difficult to get the message across, and training will take more time, be less effective, and therefore affects the usability of our product. If people don't perform their tasks correctly, it can easily lead to damage to the product. Probably even worse, damage, or in simplified English, yes, it has been so well defined, we know we should say injury to the user. So we don't want to be involved in anything of the kind. Damage to the product is bad enough. A wounded or dead user is definitely very bad news for any company in any field. So safety issues, liability issues increasingly play a role, and there have been quite a few occasions where documentation has been blamed for accidents or multi-million dollar lawsuits. So human factors are a very big issue when it comes to safety, and documentation is a very important means to try and control, contain, and limit those human errors. So simplified English based on the standardization we've talked about it, you can already predict a little bit that the standardization does help you achieve a number of benefits. So we become more consistent on a word level. That starts with the simple fact that we're going to use the same word whenever we refer to the same thing. So that means an improved level of consistency. And the same happens to sentence structures or phrases. Also, if we have a scatter team of, for example, 3 writers who are permanently employed with us in Singapore, a few content writers in the US, and another team in Japan, all of them contribute to the content, but some of them could be professional writers full-time. Others are engineers. It doesn't matter. As long as they fish from the same pond, taking guidance from the same set of rules and the same words to use and apply, it is going to make their document sound more consistent, while it's not going to get rid of individual or personalized writing styles and characteristics. It is going to go a very long way towards standardizing and making sure that we put those parts of the documentation together to get a consistent manual and result without the need for reworking or editing. Also, we are definitely going to see quality improvements, and one of the most essential steps towards quality improvement is the ability to measure and judge quality. So simplified English, if nothing else, it definitely provides us with a means to quantify quality. So there are 53 writing rules, 53 and a half, and we can simply check if the writer complies with those rules. Any violation of the rules will result in a potential quality loss, and any word that is in there that is not in the dictionary will signify a potential problem. So based on these statistics, as writers, we can, or managers, we can judge how compliant and how good the quality of our documentation is. Okay, we can also definitely save cost as well as time, as we're going to see on the next few slides. A very important, like sometimes not even recognized benefit of STE is that it can provide accurate information to the reader. It is not just the fact that the language is easier to understand. but actually the technical content becomes more accurate for the reader and validation becomes easier. So if you now present a standard English text that is rather sloppy, rather complex, at least to a subject matter expert, then chances are, especially when stress levels are high, he will say something along the lines of "that looks about right." Now, in simplified English, there is no such thing as about right. It is either true or false, it's correct or wrong. So the validation process becomes much, much easier to manage, and it is also just about impossible to write anything vague in simplified English. So we are going to present information to the reader that is more to the point, more accurate, and more reliable. So as you may have heard this a few times, out of the three options, having it cheaper, faster, and better, you can only have two. If you want things cheaper and faster, it is not going to be as good. If you want things fast and good, it's going to cost you more. If you want them cheap and good, it's going to take more time. Now, with the prerequisite of simplified English, you can have all three at the same time because we start at the source, reap the benefits multiple times, and once we get to the translation stage, there is less ambiguity, more consistency, fewer words, all of which helps to make things cheaper, faster, and better all at the same time. So, with the consideration of time, I'm just going to skip the slide about the history of STE. It's good enough that we know that this is a movement that already started in the 70s with the plain English movement, and it gained popularity and traction in the 80s when they created a different flavor of plain English known as simplified English, and finally roughly in the early 2000s, which is about the time when I started getting involved with the STE. It was this time that there was a renaming going on, and from then on it has been a very interesting field to work for and work in, where different customers from different companies would be interested in using the standard. In fact, we also got a customer request from Louis Vuitton, a fashion, supposedly the world's leading brand in luxury and fashion. Sorry, I'm not very good with brands, but it is also that a fashion brand would consider the use of simplified English for their client services team. So it has come a long way indeed. Now, if we had to talk about STE and try to define it in today's terms, then there are many answers for that, but I'm just going to give, I'm not going to give them all. So one answer that I am presenting here is that it's a set of 53 writing rules. Now, this is very similar to many companies, especially larger companies, what they have in place known as the corporate style guide. And the corporate style guide will tell you exactly what words to use, which syntax to try and avoid. And many of the rules will be quite familiar to professional writers and editors. It's not the rules themselves that makes STE unique, but one aspect that makes STE rather unique is the fact that this is a very balanced and rather complete set of rules. It was not based on the personal preferences of just one or two people within the company who may or may not still be working within the same organization, but a whole committee that has developed this standard. So some of them are linguists, some of them engineers, some of them from the airlines, and some of them operators, some of them manufacturers, and some of them from the MROs. So many different people with different views, some of them native English speakers, some of them native speakers of French, German, Italian, and some other languages. And they established over the years that these writing rules made sense and allowed them to rewrite any of their existing documents based on the rules, making their documents easier to understand while maintaining accuracy and validity. So that makes this set of rules rather valuable. I'm not saying that all 53 writing rules are equally important. I would sometimes argue that one or two don't make a lot of sense. However, a very few of them actually make up like 70% of the value of STE. And one of them is the rule that I would consider most important, that basically tells users that they can only use approved words. Just a second. Okay. So based on the approved words, you go on to make your sentences, and this is where STE starts to become very different from other corporate style guides, because the specification includes a core vocabulary of around 930 words, and those 930 words will let you write just about everything that you need for technical documents, even for procedures in general. Basically, these are the words that glue your product documentation together. It is like the cement or the glue for building your documents. And those 900 words are very generally valid words for technical documentation. And even though STE comes from the aircraft industry, we will not find words like wing or engine in there, because the core vocabulary is intended to be used by a general audience, and we just want to make sure that we do not force terminology or specific words upon users of the specification, who should be free to use the terminology that is appropriate for their audience. So we cannot standardize the core vocabulary in such a way that it's only geared towards the aircraft industry, because we don't know your audience, we don't know the audience, and we cannot be too specific about the product. So the basic thing is that we just wanted to make sure that within a given context, we only add one word for every meaning, and those words we choose only have one meaning. So one word, one meaning, both ways. No words with more than one meaning, and no more than one word for any given concept or meaning. Now, the general vocabulary works basically like that. Okay, it is also a list of non-approved words. So there are two parts to the dictionary: approved and non-approved words. With the non-approved words, the intention here is as such, where when people have been using words for a long time, and they have been writing documentation for many decades, if not centuries already, then some words would have become very established, and yet in STE we don't want people to use them anymore. So with the non-approved words, they are actually included in the dictionary, marked as non-approved, and provided with one or more possibility or possible synonyms or approved words to use. This is very helpful to the writer, who then makes his transition from standard English to simplified English, because it will provide him with all the ideas that will be difficult to think of all by himself or herself. And we're going to see some examples later on. So we do have guidelines for customer-specific terms. Most of them are known as technical names. And those technical names basically are those terms, mainly nouns, that you need in order to write meaningful content about your specific product or services. Now, at this point, I'm just going to take a pause here, so that you can digest most of what was just shared, and then continue a little bit. Okay. So I like having these quotes in between my slides during the presentation, so that people get a chance to take a pause, breathe a little bit, and then think about what was just shared, as well as some of the quotes that we present here. Okay, so STE is very a versatile standard. In fact, it's really just a balanced set of rules with a general dictionary and guidelines that we can definitely say makes it a very good standard to try and get hold of, to get in control of your technical English communications. So just to share a little bit more of what is Simplified English, I started off working with issue number 3 and 4 of the specification. So just as I was starting out, we were updating issue 3 of the spec to issue 4. And back in those days, we used to print them in hard copies and send them overseas for on-site customer training. Then gradually, we made the move towards only having printed versions, PDF copies. In 2013 was issue 6, followed by issue 7 and issue 8. So the core difference is when they updated issue 6 to 7. That is when the STE rules were completely reorganized in a way where we used to have 65 writing rules and now we only have 53 of those, because some of those rules became embedded into the main rules. So they were reorganized, regrouped, and restructured. The rules themselves have not changed a lot from issue 6 to 7. It's just a matter of reorganization so that it's user-friendlier. And then from issue 7 to issue 8, the main changes were made in the dictionary. And it is actually quite fun to see that. This time in 2021, there were about 32% of those words in the dictionary were revised alongside user-friendlier sentence examples, because Simplified English is a little bit like learning a third language, and to gain fluency and proficiency in the shortest time available is really not to speak it, but rather to try and write Simplified English sentences. So these sentence examples, by reading them, both the non-approved and approved versions, can really help you improve your grasp of the language of STE. So here, on top of those 706 words we're talking about, 150 words were user-driven changes, and I find this a very welcome move. It also signifies like an element of an open culture, because this is not something done before in the past 38 years, and now we're starting to move towards a very collaborative culture. Also because more and more people outside of the aerospace, more and more writers outside of the aerospace industry are getting involved with the Simplified Technical English movement, and they are starting to use it for their documentation. So it's a pretty promising start, if you ask me. Okay. Now, just a quick recap. There are 3 pillars of the STE specification. Simplified Technical English is not like a bottle of wine that you could just pop into a supermarket or get your orders on Vivino, and the wine gets delivered and you could start drinking it after resting it in a decanter for 10 minutes or 2 hours. Simplified Technical English is a little bit more like tea. It's a little bit more like tea leaves. You basically go to the shop, grab your tea leaves, come back, select a nice teapot, make sure you boil your water nicely, and you start brewing your tea. Why do I say that? Because when you get a copy of your specification, you are only given those rules and the general vocabulary to work with. And from then on, you draw from your training and learning experience of STE to build your own customer or project-specific dictionary. So it is not a complete product that you get off the shelves. It is something that requires an investment of your own learning and time for the third part of the specification, because the use of Simplified English would always rise and fall with your own dictionary. So having very good words selected for your client-specific dictionary is an important step in the STE implementation. I've also heard of customer complaints where They would have purchased a software checker tool for maybe 10,000 euros and for 5 licenses, but end up not using the software tool because they did not build a good dictionary. They did not select their words correctly, and as a result, the software does not work or align very well with those choice of words. So there are situations like that when clients are not careful about who they outsource or how they build their dictionaries. Okay, so I think things are starting to get a little bit more exciting at this stage because we are already moving on to some of those useful STE rules that will be helpful for your work. And even if you did not attend a full workshop, knowing 1 or 2 of these rules, you would be able to see a slight improvement in your writing already. So as I've said, there are 53 of these writing rules, and actually I sometimes claim that there are 53 and a half, but if you are curious about this mystery, I'll refer you to a full-blown training session. So basically, these rules all have some characteristics in common. We have a rule, we have an example, approved example, and we also have a non-approved example, like so, what you see on this the slide. So the most important rule that I could think of in Simplified English is the one that tells us to only use approved words. And Simplified English tells us that we should shun the word to inspect. It tells us to rather use the noun inspection or the verb to examine. Okay, so the second one might make sense because examine is a very specific way of inspecting. It is inspecting by looking at something, looking for something specific, but how about this visual inspection? Is it really so much better to say to do a visual inspection rather than to visually inspect? Arguably so, but I think it becomes clearer looking at the other example here. It actually came from a Boeing aircraft maintenance manual. So a Boeing 747 specifically. So many times they use this fake verb to fluorescent, penetrant, inspect. Now, of course, you are not going to find this word in any dictionary. Try translating it into Japanese. It's impossible. Most languages do not allow for something like this to be created. So especially for people who have English as a second language or who have limited English in this case, then this is going to be very difficult to digest. And also we are interested in consistency. Now, okay, we could potentially still get away with fluorescent, penetrant, inspect, but how about when we do an ultrasonic or an infrared or a non-destructive inspection? Would it then be to infraredly inspect? I don't really think so. Ultrasonically inspect? Very awkward. Non-destructively inspect? Weird. So what is the advantage of using the noun inspection? It is, in fact, the fact that no matter what is the type of inspection, we can always use the same sentence structure. So do a fluorescent penetrant inspection, do an ultrasonic inspection, do a non-destructive inspection. And only this adjective, only the word in front of inspection is going to change. And this helps a lot to save cost, both in creating and especially in translating your documentation. And because this phrasing is going to become familiar to your users, to readers of your manual, it will take them less time to digest, and they will just get your message more efficiently, more quickly, and more accurately. So I take a pause at this time because I believe there is like a 10-minute break given for the workshop, and after 10 minutes, we will continue with some more of the rules. I would like to present you with a business case study of how STE actually helps to save cost in practice, followed by a few very good industry examples of how the rewriting in Simplified English is completed. So is it okay that we now take a pause for 10 minutes? Or
暂停10分钟，他说。
但你能听得见我说话吗？我们可以继续了。如果
可不可以？
大家都到齐的话，我们可以再继续啊。好，我待会儿我暂时还没有打开那个摄像头，我待会儿打开的时候，我再跟你说，你也顺便一起打开，这样子的话，
好的，
我才会有那个现场的感觉，我才能够进入状况。OK，
好的，
谢
没有问
谢。
题。
待会儿再弄哈，谢谢。OK，Okay, so let's welcome back. So let's come back with the second part of the STE rules. So we would have, most of us will have seen this kind of rules. We do not like long sentences. And Simplified English tells us that for procedures or tasks, there should be no more than 20 words in one sentence. And for descriptive text, we are allowed some more flexibility, and we need this. So we have up to 25 words in this case. Also, English is a rather problematic language in that it allows us to just put any number of nouns in a cluster, and this makes it very difficult at times to see the relationship between the nouns in those clusters. German is even worse because they don't actually even have spaces in between those words, but still, English is pretty bad. Languages such as French or Spanish do not allow you to do this. They will only allow you to combine words if you have some glue, some specific means to relate these words together. So rather than, for example, to say the electric power supplies supply fuse holder. So is this an electric holder? Is this an electric fuse holder? Or is it an electric power supply and then a fuse holder? So just need to clarify which words belong most closely together. And then we use a preposition such as of or for in order to clarify this. Even just one adjective and two nouns, for example, left engine switch, can already be confusing and difficult to understand, difficult to translate as well. And if I say left engine switch, does that mean it is the switch for the left engine, or is it the left switch for a specific engine? So do left and switch or left and engine belong most directly together? And also we want to be direct yet helpful. We're not being impolite, but we still want to issue commands to the user. If we want him to remove the plug from the power socket, we just tell him, remove the plug. We're not going to say the plug ought to be removed. We just want to be very direct, making sure that he understands us, and we want to make sure that everybody understands who is required to take which action at which point in time. So, okay, so let's try to have a look onto the next slide. There are two pieces of text, the top and the bottom. I will show left and the right. I will show them in a while. One of them is written in standard English, and the other one is written in simplified technical English. So this is the patient device, the patient assistant. It is created to help monitor the heartbeat or to collect data for patient's heart rate, making sure that everything is normal when the doctor gets to check the information. So this is the documentation provided to customers, to the patients, and advising them of how they could use the device. So just I'll give you like half a minute to review the standard English text, and then half a minute to look at the standard English and the STE language all together. So you may be able to guess by now that simplified technical English text is more direct, it's more to the point, it's not always shorter. In this case, it's not. And yet it does away with unnecessary information and uses simple words. Okay, so this is just a comparison, and just to illustrate that perhaps a perfect tense, for instance, is not approved, and we have to turn it into a simple present tense or a simple past tense in this case. And of course, the word design is not necessary for STE, so we simply get rid of it in the new sentence that we write. And overall, you will find that with writing in STE, you will have less iterations, fewer change cycles, less rework, fewer corrections to perform. And basically, we can have be more efficient in performing these operations that the documentation helps us to do. Now, here's another case study that it's one of our customers who makes mobile X-ray based imaging solutions for chemotherapy patients, and they are within the EU, so that means they have to create documentation in English and export in 7 other languages. Okay, so basically this is a case study that we did for their manuals, and we say you already saw a few things on the earlier slides that helps you to save cost. So how does it work in practice and in numbers? So first of all, you see that the number of words will be smaller. In general, we see that about 20 to 25% reduction in text volume. Maybe not in the first example, but in general, that is the case. Sometimes much more, up to 80% if the source text is very badly written. Now, but in general, we can say about 25% of the words in our text are redundant, so we can do away with them. And if I have a manual that used to have contain about 10,000 words, we're going to be left with 7,000 words from now on. And of course, it goes a very long way towards reducing translation costs, not just by 25%. Most translators charge by the word, but good translators nowadays use translation memory, which basically is a piece of software like a database. Whenever you translate a sentence as a translator, that sentence along with its translations are going to be stored in a database. And if you come across the same sentence or a very similar one again, the translation memory software is going to suggest the previous translation, and a good translator also will pass on at least part of that benefit to her customers. So that means translation costs will go down by at least 35%. Now, if you translate into 10 languages, multiply 35% by 10, definitely STE will pay for itself. Also, we have a faster time to market, both in delivering our product. As part of that product are manuals, and for users of the product to actually use those products in order to achieve their time to market. And in general, it is very difficult to put a finger on this, if any exact figures, but we avoid a lot of communication issues, such as unnecessary calls to the help desk, because things are not clear in our documentation. So for those people who like graphs more than text, this is just an overview of how the number of unique terms, the translatability, and overall volume of the text are affected by the use of simplified English as compared to standard English. So we have fewer terms, around 30% of those terms that we would find in standard English, only 30% of those we will still keep in simplified English for much, much more consistency, less variant, and the text is much easier and faster to translate, and the volume would have reduced by about 25%. So this is a real case study, and it's not it does not constitute a binding offer, but it is just just a real case study for you to get a more accurate idea of what your returns on investments could be with the use of STE. So right now, I'm just going to try to multitask a bit, turn on my camera so that you get to see your speaker and I get to see or hear your questions. And if, yeah, hopefully this works. I'm not sure if you're seeing me now, but if it works, I could also try to take a look at what's going on site. Yeah, but if bandwidth is an issue, then we don't have to use it. Okay. So, do you see me? Yeah, good. So, the first example I wanted to show you, actually it's the second example, is it's an administrative guide from the credit card security company. So it used to be a French company that now comes under Thales, and they specialize in credit card security. And in this guide, they are presenting information to the administrators, telling them that this is what you need to know before you set things up on the computer. Okay, so just maybe take half a minute to review these few lines of text, and then I will continue. Okay, so when you are presenting the card admin case study, there are, this is the text that we have rewritten in STE, and you see that it is much clearer. Also, before in the original text, there were many complicated phrasings, like typically having an in-depth knowledge of the SIM card, as well as to know what do you mean by GPP-TS 31.102. So we try to take on the simple words. We try to take on a few parts first and apply STE knowledge to the writing. So instead of having an in-depth knowledge, you fully know. And instead of adapting, personalizing the content, you adapt the content to create prototypes, make prototypes instead of rapidly prototype, because prototype as a word in itself is not an approved verb. We try not to have, if you recall from a previous example, we try not to have one word that represents many different parts of speech. So one word, one part of speech, one meaning. So prototype should be used as a noun in this case. And that is why the rewriting is created like this, where your recommended qualification level is as such. The SIM card administrator fully knows the technical specification, and they will do personalization check instead of checking personalization, and manage your card information instead of managing your card information. So you could already see that STE does not like the ing form of the verb. Okay, and also in terms of the personnel of, for the personnel of technical marketing, then they will adapt the information instead of personalizing the content. They will also make prototypes instead of rapidly prototyping your SIM tool applications. And people is not an approved word, so we turn it around and say persons who do tests of mobile phones. Okay. Now on to construction and mining. So this customer of ours has offices in Australia, South Africa, US, and in Japan. So when different offices work on different parts of the documentation, it is also important that we try to make sure that every office has its own unique set of words to use. And in the case of construction and mining, so this is a piece of text from the American office where it is a technical service manual. And in this manual, this is how they present guidelines on lifting the machine. So for a two-piece teardown, they would go on to hook the chain to the cutter boom and sling straps around the cylinder. And sometimes if they forget or they suddenly recall that they have to add extra information within the parentheses, followed by a few lines of extra text that may or may not be relevant for this paragraph. So this is the original text written in standard American English, and this is the text presented in STE. Now, if you take a look at the comparison here, follow in STE means to come after. And even though it's an approved word, it is it has the definition of to come after. So it is an approved word, but it should not be used to mean obey. So you simply obey those guidelines and you remove, instead of adding a new word or designing or creating a new word like to tear down, we say to remove the cutter boom, we connect the chain to the cutter boom stops. And again, to remove the shear cylinders. So one good thing about rewriting is that it forces your writers to relook at the documents that they have created, because they would not normally have that time or that luxury to rewrite documents in the comforts of a training like this, which is what we will do on the day 2 of the training. So to remove the shear cylinders, you use straps around the lower shear cylinder, mounting pins, and around the rear bumper. Do not use chains around the cylinder and mounting pins. So here she decided that this is an important sentence. I will not use parentheses anymore. I want to make it a full sentence and keep it like this. Okay, and also after reading the next few lines about sling straps, she decided that, oh yeah, really they are not relevant. It's good to give information, but not at this time. So she took out those lines and proceeded to rewrite the next part about multiple component teardown. So again, we are introducing new words into our content, and that's not very good for consistency and accuracy. So instead of saying multiple component teardowns, we say to remove more than 2 components. And we refer to the lifting and blocking diagrams in the parts manual. Okay. So at this point, because we still have 20 minutes, I'll open the floor for questions at this point, and then continue with a little bit more of my presentation before we close. You could ask your questions in Mandarin, and I'll try my best to answer those as well. And if I need help with translations, I would still ask. Hi, Rebecca. Is that Rebecca or not? I
guess not.
Okay.
You are still muted. Fan Hong, you are still muted. No, yeah.
Thank you, Shumin, for updating us with the new issue of STE. I'm relatively new on this topic, so could you add some background information about the creation of the new issue? What triggers the revision or updating of the new issue, and who are the authors in the behind? And what kind of rules or protocols you follow to make the new issue, and also who actually who paid for this, and also how can you and your team evaluate the effects of the new issue in practice?
Yes, thank you. Could you please introduce yourself again, from your name and your company?
Sorry, my name is Lin Dong, Donglin in Chinese, and a lecturer in the University of International Economics and Business. So I'm from the English department. So I'm very interested in the language, especially the controlled simplified English. Actually, in my course of technical writing, I ask my students to study the style guide to make them prepare for the internship as a technical writer. So we learn a little bit of the simplified English or clan English, but have enough time to learn all the details. So I'm especially interested in the background story of updating STE. So thank you if you can offer me some information.
Yes, I will. So if you look at the screen here, the STE specification was created some 38 years ago. And when you get a copy of the specification, there will be all the acknowledgements of the people who worked on this file. So I actually have direct contact with the chairman of the STE Maintenance Group. So we have a direct line to him, and if I have whenever I have any feedback, I would always send those to him. I wouldn't be able to name everybody from the STE committee because I do not personally sit in a committee and meet them at the regular meetings, but we've known each other for a long time. And yeah, so you would be able to see all the revisions as well as the copy, like when they were revised. And the reason why this specification is reviewed every 3-4 years, it's because language keeps changing, and we need to make sure that changes get integrated, and we improvise and make sure that the sentences are as relevant as possible. They stay as relevant and as true as possible to reality on the ground. So when you get a copy of this issue 8, it will be nice to study it, especially if you're a lecturer at the university. I think that the first part of the specification will be very, very useful for your understanding and comprehension of the standard. And also